A 22-year-old woman got married and had a child in Australia, seemingly living a perfect life. But tragedy struck unexpectedly. Her body was found in a river. After an investigation, the police uncovered a horrifying truth. It was her mother-in-law, who killed her with a hammer in the bathroom. Even more chilling, her 2-year-old son witnessed the entire event. So, what was the real conflict between the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law? What could have pushed a mother to commit such a brutal act against her daughter-in-law? And the husband, the most important man in both their lives, what role did he play in this tense and tragic situation? Today's case revolves around a wound family tragedy in Melbourne, where a bitter mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflict ended in a heartbreaking outcome. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the most gripping cases. Now let's dive into the hidden truths behind this tragic story. On May 4, 2012, at a police station in Melbourne, Australia, a middle-aged Chinese woman arrived in a panic, desperately seeking help. With a confused face and vacant eyes, she struggled to explain what happened, but was held back by the language barrier, only managing to describe the situation in a jumbled way. After several attempts to communicate, the police began to understand that a serious altercation had taken place between her and her daughter-in-law, which tragically resulted in the young woman's death. Recognizing the gravity of the case, the officers immediately called for a Chinese interpreter. The woman's name was Zhuang Hua Qiao, 51 years old, originally from Fujian, China. She moved to Australia with her husband to be closer to her children. Qiao lived with her daughter but often visited her son's family to help out. On the afternoon of the incident, her daughter brought her to her son's house to visit her grandson. Around 1 p.m., Qiao walked into the house and saw her daughter-in-law, Lin Dan, bathing their 2-year-old son. Worried the water might be too hot and could burn the child, she spoke up to warn her, but her advice wasn't well received by Lin Dan. The already tense relationship between the two women grew even more strained when Lin Dan ignored Qiao's warning and kept bathing the child. Frustrated by her daughter-in-law's attitude, Qiao snapped, "Are you trying to burn my grandson?" The conflict between Qiao and Lin Dan had been simmering for a long time. Frequent arguments had created a constant atmosphere of tension in the household. This latest dispute was like the last straw, pushing them both toward a tragic, irreversible breaking point. In her statement, Qiao claimed that her harsh words had made Lin Dan furious, causing her to grab a hammer and attack. In a panic, Qiao said she struggled with her daughter-in-law and accidentally struck her on the head, killing her instantly. However, Qiao's testimony raised many suspicions. She kept blaming Lam Dan, recounting past conflicts, and insisted that her actions were purely in self-defense. Notably, the incident happened on the afternoon of May 3rd. But Qiao didn't report it until the next day, May 4th. What's more suspicious was her demeanor. Instead of showing panic or remorse, like most people who accidentally cause harm, she appeared unusually angry and hostile. Faced with these doubts, the police pressed her about where she had hidden the victim's body. Qiao admitted that after the incident, she wrapped Lin Dan's body in a plastic bag, hid it in a garbage bin in the garden, and carefully cleaned up the scene. Then, she left her 2-year-old grandson alone in the house and went back to her daughter's home without informing her son. This behavior only deepened the police's suspicions about her story. Around 1 a.m. that night, Zhuang Rongping, Qiao's son, came home after his work shift. He was immediately alarmed to find his 2-year-old son crying alone in the house. With no sign of his wife anywhere, he kept calling his wife, but no one answered. When he called his mother, he got no clear explanation. Either a sense of unease crept in, but exhausted. After comforting his son to sleep, Zhuang Rongping finally dozed off himself. Meanwhile, after a brief call with her son, Qiao quietly returned to Zhuang Rongping's house around midnight. Under the cover of darkness, she silently wheeled the garbage bin containing her daughter-in-law's body about 700 meters to the riverbank. After dumping the plastic-wrapped body into the river, she quickly returned the bin to its original spot as if nothing had happened. It wasn't until the next morning that Kiao went to the police station to confess. Immediately, the police launched a search for Lam Dan's body based on Kiao's statement. The victim was soon found in the river, but much of the blood had been washed away by the water. The autopsy revealed that Lin Dan had suffered multiple blows to the head, causing severe skull fractures, along with injuries to her nose, chin, legs, and teeth. These injuries directly contradicted Kiao's initial claim that she accidentally struck her daughter-in-law while defending herself. Moreover, the examination found no injuries on Kiao's body, making her self-defense story even less believable, although it's still unclear who struck first. The injuries on Lam Dan's hands showed she fought back fiercely before being brutally killed. This horrifying scene must have unfolded during a tense struggle, ending in the tragic death of Lin Dan right in her own bathroom. What shocked the police even more was the presence of the 2-year-old child at the scene. At the time of the murder, Lin Dan was bathing her son, meaning the little boy witnessed the entire brutal attack on his mother. That fragile young heart undoubtedly suffered a heavy psychological trauma. This case began with what seemed like a minor disagreement, but was actually the breaking point of years of simmering tension between the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. To better understand the root cause of this tragedy, let's take a closer look at the relationship between the victim, Lam Dan, and her husband, Zhuang Rongping. Lin Dan was born in 1990 into a well-off family in Fujian, China, where she was deeply loved and given every opportunity to study. At 17, she confidently set off to study abroad in Australia. It was there, at a school dance in 2009, that she met Zhuang Rongping, a fellow countryman who shared her hometown and many common interests. Their connection quickly blossomed into love. Not long after, Lin Dan discovered she was pregnant. This joyful news led Bianya to propose, and they hurried to plan their wedding. Kiao, Bean's mother, was very pleased to learn that her future daughter-in-law came from a wealthy family. She urged her son to move forward quickly with the wedding. On Lam Dan's side, her family was initially hesitant because she was still so young. However, seeing the genuine love between the couple, along with Lam Dan's pregnancy, and admiring Bian's determination, a bright young man from a poor background, who had managed to settle in Australia, they eventually gave their blessing. Though they were financially well off, Lam Dan's parents still accepted the traditional bridal gift of 150,000 yuan from the Trang family. Following their customs, Lin Dan and Zhuang Rongping's wedding took place on February 26, 2010. To better care for her pregnant daughter-in-law, Kiao decided to move to Australia. Despite having limited education and facing language barriers, she took on the role of managing her son's household. When her grandson was born, she poured all her energy into caring for him. Coming from a traditional society with strong patriarchal values, Kiao always valued her son more than her daughters. Before Bian was born, she already had 2 daughters. At that time, China's strict family planning policies made it difficult to have a son. Determined to have a boy, Kiao secretly gave birth to Bian in a pigsty and faced countless hardships raising her 3 children. Because of this, she placed all her hopes on Bian Yun, her only son. His successful settlement in Australia and obtaining a green card became her greatest pride. Later, her 2 daughters also came to Australia to reunite with the family. Understanding his mother's sacrifices, Ben Yuan always loved, respected, and obeyed her completely. At first, Kiao's presence in Australia gave Ben Yuan peace of mind, knowing someone was there to care for his wife and child. However, he never expected that the tension between his mother and wife would only grow worse, making the family atmosphere increasingly suffocating. Lin Dan grew up in a modern educational environment in Australia from the age of 17. She had a strong, free-spirited personality and loved her independence. In contrast, Kiao, with limited education and conservative views, clung to many traditional habits that didn't quite fit with modern life. The stark differences in mindset and lifestyle between the two women planted the seeds of inevitable conflict during Lam Dan's pregnancy. Kiao tried to hold back and took good care of her daughter-in-law. She chose to stay silent about things she didn't like, believing that a calm mind was the most important for a pregnant woman. However, after her grandson was born, Kiao began imposing her traditional views on how to care for and raise the child. She took it upon herself to make all the decisions, which left Lin Dan feeling increasingly suffocated and stressed. Whenever her husband came home from work, Lin Dan would often complain about the conflicts with her mother-in-law. However, Zhuang Rongping didn't fully realize how serious the situation was. Instead of stepping in to mediate, he simply advised his wife to be patient and endure. His indifference only deepened Lam Dan's frustration. She began to push back by ignoring her mother-in-law's outdated methods of raising the child. The daughter-in-law's disrespectful attitude infuriated Kiao. She often lashed out with harsh words. While Lin Dan refused to back down, the conflict between them escalated, forcing Zhuang Rongping to ask his mother to move out in an attempt to ease the tension. Lin Dan even stopped calling Kiao mother and kept her distance, which only made Kiao more resentful. The distance between Lin Dan and Kiao, especially being excluded from caring for her grandson, pushed Kiao to act out in extreme ways. She once cut Lan Dan's hair with scissors, slapped her, and even threatened, "Do you believe I would actually hurt you?" Shockingly, she also asked her 2-year-old grandson, "Do you want a new mom?" Unable to endure her mother-in-law's control and harsh words any longer, Lin Dan bluntly declared, "If you don't leave the house, I will." Overwhelmed with frustration, she decided to return to her hometown in Fujian, China. Seeing their daughter treated so poorly, Lam Dan's parents were heartbroken and wanted her to stay with them. However, after Bian's repeated promises that he would no longer let his mother live with them, Lin Dan finally agreed to come back to Australia, even after moving in with her daughter. Kiao didn't stop complaining to Bianyu and about Lam Dan's attitude. She went so far as to encourage her son to divorce. She constantly spread rumors, claiming Lin Dan married Binyun just to get a green card. Kiao repeatedly brought up the 150,000 yuan bridal gift, seeing it as an injustice, and insisted that Benyu had married the wrong woman. She pushed Benyu to divorce as soon as possible, believing the rushed marriage after a single school dance was a mistake, and that Lin Dan didn't truly respect her husband's family. Faced with his mother's relentless harsh words, Zhuang Rongping chose to stay silent. Maybe he understood the sacrifices she had made in the past and didn't want to argue with her. Or perhaps he believed that silence was the best way for things to calm down. Whatever the reason, Bian's silence did not resolve the conflict between his mother and wife. Instead, it tightened the knot of tension until it finally exploded into tragedy. And all of this began over something seemingly small: the water for the grandson's bath being too hot. In early 2014, the case went to trial in an Australian court. Kiao defended herself by claiming her actions were in self-defense, sparked by Lan Dan's disrespectful behavior toward her and the family, her rude attitude, sending Kiao to live with her daughter and making her feel isolated from her son and grandson. However, this defense was rejected. The prosecution argued that Kiao, unable to control her anger, had brutally attacked Lan Dan. The wounds on the victim's body showed that Lin Dan had fought back desperately. What followed, the disposal of the body, only confirmed Kiao's cruelty and coldness. She not only took her daughter-in-law's life, but also robbed her of the dignity she deserved in death. After the trial, the jury found Kiao guilty of murder. However, the sentence she received sparked much controversy. Her defense lawyer argued that deporting her from Australia after serving her sentence would be too harsh, especially since her entire family lived in the country. They also cited her mental health issues, particularly depression caused by isolation in prison, as grounds for a reduced sentence. On the other hand, the prosecution insisted that Kiao's brutal actions were unforgivable. While she may not have intended to kill, beating her daughter-in-law to death right in front of her 2-year-old grandson was a horrific crime. The level of violence used evident from the severe injuries on the victim's body had to be taken seriously when deciding the sentence. Kiao's inhumane actions not only took the life of a young woman, but also left deep psychological scars on the child who witnessed the entire ordeal. The forensic report showed that Kiao had no prior intent before the attack. Her decision to turn herself in and the absence of any criminal record were also taken into account as significant mitigating factors. In the end, Kiao was sentenced to 18 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 13.5 years. Although she had admitted to the crime initially after the sentencing, Kiao continued to argue that she never intended to take her daughter-in-law's life. Meanwhile, Lam Dan's 2-year-old son is being cared for by his maternal grandparents, with ongoing support from Zhuang Rongping, sharing the heartbreak of losing her daughter. Lam Dan's mother choked back tears as she said, "She meant everything to me since that day. I've been haunted by nightmares. I hear her voice calling to me in my dreams. I dream of running to hold her again, but now all my hopes and dreams have been shattered. I still can't believe she's gone forever." The prosecution continued to insist that Mrs. Kiao had never truly shown remorse. Her brutal attack on her daughter-in-law, fueled by uncontrollable rage, only deepened the severity of her crime. Turning herself in and cooperating with the police could not erase her guilt. According to the sentence, Mrs. Kiao, then 49 years old, could be eligible for early release around 2027. When she would be 63, the case officially closed in February 2016. After Lam Han's mother filed a civil lawsuit and the court ordered Mrs. Kiao to pay financial compensation totaling $11 million. This marked a tragic end to the shocking case of a mother-in-law killing her daughter-in-law, a story that deeply shook the public. There's a profound proverb about the relationship between a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. The best bond is built on mutual harmony, but the worst outcome often depends on the husband. In this tragedy, if Zhuang Rongping had taken on the role of a mediator and actively tried to resolve the conflict, perhaps the devastating outcome could have been avoided. But his passiveness only fueled the tension. Instead of stepping into address the growing rift between his mother and his wife, he chose silence, ignoring all the warning signs. That silence allowed the conflict to spiral out of control until the family completely fell apart. His mother ended up in prison. His wife lost her life, and his son lost his mother forever. This case is not only a family tragedy, but also a valuable lesson about the importance of communication, understanding, and conflict resolution in relationships. It reminds us that silence is not always golden. Sometimes, silence can be the seed of irreparable tragedies. So what do you think we should do in similar situations to avoid heartbreaking consequences? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Today's heartbreaking story ends here. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the upcoming cases. Thank you very much.